They thought he was just buying groceries until his list exposed a CIA operation in motion, a simple piece of paper. That's all it took to unravel 40 years of silence. Picture this. A quiet Tuesday morning in Alexandria, Virginia. An elderly man walks into a neighborhood supermarket. His steps slow but deliberate. To everyone around him, he's just another retiree buying milk and bread. But what they do or not know is that the crumpled grocery list in his weathered hands contains coded coordinates, encrypted names, and classified intelligence that could expose a CIA operation spanning 3 continents. One accidental glance from a young store clerk sets off a chain reaction that will bring down walls of secrecy, unmask a traitor who faked his own death, and reunite 2 souls separated by decades of espionage and Cold War deception. Walter Brennan thought he had buried his past. He thought the shadows of Berlin, the dangers of Moscow, and the ghosts of Baghdad were behind him. He thought he could live out his final years in peace, blending into the suburban landscape like any other grandfather. But in the world of intelligence, retirement is an illusion. The grocery list wasn't a mistake. It was a desperate signal, a warning, a cry for help that only those trained to see beyond the ordinary could decode. What follows is a story of loyalty tested by betrayal, love that survived impossible odds, and a man who refused to let his past destroy his future. From the frozen streets of Cold War Europe to a warehouse showdown in modern-day Baltimore, Walter's journey will remind you that heroes don't always wear uniforms. Sometimes they carry grocery lists. How did a routine shopping trip expose one of the CIA's most closely guarded secrets? What was Walter really trying to say? And who was watching him all along? Stay with us. Subscribe to this channel and comment below. Tell us where you're watching from, because this story is about to take you on a journey you won't forget. Alexandria, Virginia, a city steeped in American history, where cobblestone streets meet modern townhouses, and where the Potomac River flows quietly past neighborhoods filled with federal employees, military families, and retirees seeking peace after decades of service. It's the kind of place where everyone knows their neighbors, where morning coffee at the local cafe is a ritual, and where nothing extraordinary ever seems to happen. Walter Brennan had lived in Alexandria for 12 years. His modest 2-story brick house on a tree-lined street was unremarkable. The lawn was neatly trimmed, the mailbox painted a fresh coat of black every spring, and the front porch held 2 rocking chairs that Walter rarely used. To his neighbors, he was a polite, reserved man in his late 60s, who occasionally waved hello but never lingered for conversation. He walked his golden retriever, Bailey, every morning at 7. He picked up his newspaper from the driveway in his bathrobe. He drove a 10-year-old Honda Civic that had seen better days. Nobody suspected that Walter Brennan had once been one of the CIA's most effective field operatives. On this particular Tuesday morning in late September, the air carried the first hints of autumn. Leaves were beginning to turn golden, and a cool breeze swept through the streets as Walter walked into Henderson's Grocery, a family-owned supermarket that had served the community for 30 years. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead. The smell of fresh bread wafted from the bakery section. An old country song played softly through the speakers. Walter grabbed a cart and began his routine. Milk, eggs, bread, coffee, apples. Nothing unusual, but tucked in his jacket pocket was a handwritten list, and on that list were items that would change everything. Marcus Stune, a 23-year-old college graduate working part-time at Henderson's while studying for the military entrance exam, was restocking shelves near the produce section when he noticed Walter struggling to read his list. The older man squinted at the paper, his hands trembling slightly. Marcus, ever helpful, approached. "Need any help finding something, sir?" Walter looked up, startled. For a brief moment, Marcus saw something flicker in the man's eyes. Fear, caution. It vanished instantly, replaced by a polite smile. "No, thank you, young man. Just my eyesight isn't what it used to be." As Walter moved past him, the list slipped from his fingers and fluttered to the floor. Marcus bent down to pick it up, intending to return it immediately. But as he glanced at the paper, his military aspirations and obsessive study of intelligence procedures made him pause. The list read milk, 2% bread whole wheat, LK7734, N apples, Granny Smith coffee ground. RT coordinate 38.8048, eggs dozen BZ confirm. 2,300 hours. Marcus's heart began to race. He had studied enough about military and intelligence communication to recognize that these weren't just random notations, the alphanumeric codes, the coordinate, the time notation with military format. This was something else entirely. "Sir, you dropped this," Marcus said, handing the list back to Walter. Walter's hand shot out faster than Marcus expected for a man his age. He snatched the paper, his eyes locking onto Marcus's face with an intensity that made the young man step back. "Thank you," Walter said quietly, his voice suddenly cold. Marcus watched as Walter quickly finished his shopping and left the store. Something wasn't right. His uncle, David Chung, had spent 20 years as a federal agent before retiring. Marcus had grown up hearing stories about surveillance, codes, and covert operations. His instincts screamed at him that what he had just seen was significant. He waited until his shift ended, then pulled out his phone and typed a message to his uncle. "Need to talk? Something weird happened at work? Might be nothing, but you taught me to trust my gut." 30 minutes later, Marcus sat across from his uncle at a diner near Pentagon City. David Chun, a stocky man in his 50s with sharp eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor, listened carefully as Marcus described the list. "You sure about what you saw?" David asked, his expression grave. "Absolutely. I've been studying this stuff for months. Those codes weren't random." David pulled out his phone and made a call. Marcus couldn't hear the conversation, but he watched his uncle's face grow more serious with each passing second. When David hung up, he looked at Marcus with an expression that mixed pride and concern. "You did the right thing, kid, but this just became a federal matter. We need to go now." Within 2 hours, 3 black SUVs pulled up outside Walter Brennan's quiet home in Alexandria. Neighbors peeked through curtains as federal agents, led by Special Agent Rebecca Torres of the FBI's Counterintelligence Division, knocked firmly on the door. Walter opened it slowly, his face calm but his eyes betraying the storm inside. "Mr. Brennan?" Agent Torres said, holding up her credentials. "We need to talk about your grocery list." Walter said nothing. He simply stepped aside and led them in. Inside the house, the agents found what appeared to be the home of an ordinary retiree. Family photos on the mantel, a stack of books about gardening on the coffee table, a half-finished crossword puzzle on the kitchen counter. But Agent Torres wasn't fooled. She had been in this business long enough to know that the most dangerous operators were the ones who blended in perfectly. "Mr. Brennan, we have reason to believe you're involved in activities that may compromise national security." Torres began, her tone professional but firm. Walter sat in his armchair, his hands folded calmly in his lap. "I'm 68 years old. I buy groceries, walk my dog, and watch the news. I don't know what you're talking about." "Then explain the codes on your shopping list." Walter's jaw tightened almost "Helps me remember things. Getting old does that to you." LK773 foreign isn't an abbreviation for milk, Mr. Brennan, and 38.8048 is a geographic coordinate. You know what it points to? Walter remained silent. Agent Torres leaned forward. It points to a location outside Langley, more specifically, to a defunct safe house that was used during Operation Silver Shield in the night, a CIA operation that you were part of. So let's stop pretending you're just a confused old man buying groceries. The room fell silent. Walter stared at Torres, his expression unreadable. Finally, he spoke, his voice low and steady. If you know who I was, then you know I can't talk about what I did. And if you're here, then you already know more than you should. Torres pulled out a file and placed it on the coffee table. We've been monitoring unusual communications patterns for 3 months. Coded messages in classified ads, dead drops in public parks. Someone is running an operation, Mr. Brennan. And all signs point to you. Walter's eyes flickered to the file, but he didn't reach for it. I'm retired. 20 years retired. Then why was your grocery list a signaled protocol from a CIA operation that's supposedly inactive? Walter closed his eyes briefly, and for a moment he looked every bit his 68 years. Tired, weathered, haunted. Because, he finally said, some operations never really end. The words hung in the air like a confession and a warning all at once. If you want to know what Walter means by that, if you want to understand what operation never ended and why a retired spy would risk everything with a simple grocery list, then subscribe to this channel right now. Hit that like button. Leave a comment telling us where you're watching from. Share this video with someone who loves a good mystery, because what comes next will change everything you think you know about loyalty, betrayal, and the price of keeping secrets. But before we go there, you need to understand who Walter Brennan really was. And to do that, we have to go back, way back, to a time when the world was divided by an iron curtain, and men like Walter operated in the shadows between two superpowers on the brink of annihilation. Berlin, 1987. The wall still stood, a concrete scar cutting through the heart of a divided city. On one side, the bright lights and relative freedom of West Berlin. On the other, the gray, oppressive atmosphere of the East, where the Stasi watched everything and trust was a luxury no one could afford. Walter Brennan was 31 years old, recruited fresh out of Georgetown University with a degree in international relations and a fluency in German, Russian, and Hungarian that made him invaluable to the CIA. He had been in Berlin for 2 years, operating undercover as a cultural attaché at the American Embassy. His real job was far more dangerous. Recruiting assets, gathering intelligence on Soviet military movements, and running operations that could never be acknowledged. The 80s in Berlin were electric with tension. The Cold War was entering its final chapter, though no one knew it yet. Reagan demanded that Gorbachev tear down the wall. Soviet power seemed unshakable. And in between, thousands of intelligence officers from both sides played a deadly game of chess with human lives as the pieces. Walter learned quickly that trust was the enemy. He saw colleagues disappear, either recalled suddenly or worse, found dead in apparent accidents that were anything but. He learned to sleep with one eye opened, to check his car for explosives, to vary his routes home, and to never, ever let anyone get too close. But then he met Esther. Budapest, 1989. The Soviet bloc was crumbling. Hungary was quietly opening its borders, becoming the first domino in a chain reaction that would bring down the entire system. Walter was sent to Budapest to coordinate with Hungarian dissidents and gather intelligence on Soviet troop movements. Esther Kovacs was 28, a translator working at the Hungarian Foreign Ministry. She had dark hair, intelligent eyes, and a quiet strength that came from living under oppression her entire life. She approached Walter at a diplomatic reception, speaking in flawless English with just a hint of an accent that made every word sound like poetry. "You're not really a cultural attaché, are you?" she said, her lips curving into a knowing smile. Walter's training kicked in immediately. Deflect, maintain cover, but something in her eyes made him pause. "And you're not just a translator," he replied carefully. "No," she said softly. "I'm someone who wants to help." Someone who's tired of living in a cage? She became his most valuable asset. For 6 months, Esther provided Walter with intelligence that helped the CIA predict Soviet responses to the Hungarian reforms. She was brilliant, brave, and utterly committed to seeing her country free, and against every rule he had ever learned, Walter fell in love with her. They met in secret, a cafe near the Danube where they could talk without being overheard, a park bench where they would sit and pretend to read newspapers, a safe house on the outskirts of the city where they could finally be themselves, if only for a few stolen hours. "When this is over," Walter told her one night, holding her close as rain drummed against the windows, "come to America with me. We'll leave all of this behind." Esther smiled sadly. "You know, it's not that simple. It can be. I'll make it happen." "You're a good man," vouted Brennan, "but you're also a spy, and spies don't get happy endings." He wanted to argue, to convince her she was wrong, but deep down he knew she was right. November 1989. The Berlin Wall fell. The world watched in amazement as Germans on both sides tore down the barrier that had divided them for nearly 30 years. In the chaos and celebration, intelligence agencies scrambled to reposition assets, secure defectors, and gather up secrets that were suddenly exposed. Walter was pulled back to Berlin. He promised Esther he would return within a month. They would be together. They would find a way. But when he returned to Budapest in January 1990, Esther was gone. Her apartment was empty. Her colleagues at the Foreign Ministry said she had resigned suddenly. No forwarding address, no explanation. Walter used every resource. The CIA had to find her. He called in favors, pushed his superiors, and launched an unofficial investigation that consumed him. 3 months later, a burned body was found in a warehouse on the outskirts of Budapest. Hungarian authorities identified it as Esther Kovacs based on dental records. The official cause of death was ruled an accident, a fire that got out of control. Walter knew better. Someone had discovered she was working with the CIA. Someone had silenced her, and he blamed himself for not protecting her. The guilt nearly destroyed him. He threw himself into his work with a recklessness that worried his handlers. He took assignments no one else wanted. Moscow in the winter, Baghdad during the Gulf War, Belfast during the Troubles. He became the CIA's go-to operative for impossible missions, the man who would walk into hell if ordered to do so. But he never forgot Esther. He kept a photo of her hidden in his wallet. He dreamed about her, and on the darkest nights, he whispered apologies to a ghost who could never hear them. By 2001, Walter was 45 and running out of steam. The September 11th attacks changed everything. The CIA shifted its focus from the Cold War remnants to counter. Walter was sent to Afghanistan, then Iraq, chasing shadows of a different kind. In Baghdad, 2003, he worked alongside Thomas Reed, his closest friend in the agency. Thomas was younger, brasher, but absolutely loyal. They had saved each other's lives more times than either could count. When their convoy was ambushed outside Fallujah and Thomas was killed by an IED, Walter felt the last piece of his humanity shatter. He requested retirement. The CIA granted it. He was 50 years old, with more scars than memories, and a quiet desperation to find peace before it was too late. For 12 years, Walter lived that peaceful life in Alexandria. He adopted Bailey, the golden retriever, who became his only real companion. He avoided old colleagues. He never talked about his past. He became the invisible man, hiding in plain sight. Until 3 months ago, when the phone call came, it was a voice he didn't recognize. Encrypted. Brief. Operation Silver Shield is active again. You're needed. Protocols resume immediately. Await instructions. Walter nearly hung up. Silver Shield was a Cold War operation. It had been defunct for decades. But the voice used authentication codes that only a handful of people in the world knew. Real codes. Current codes. Someone inside the CIA had reactivated him. The instructions came through old methods. Classified ads in the Washington Post. Messages hidden in crossword puzzles. And yes, coded grocery lists. Walter was to act as a relay point, passing intelligence between active field agents and a handler he never met. He didn't know what the operation was about. He didn't ask. That was the nature of compartmentalized intelligence. You did your part and trusted the bigger picture was in good hands. But 3 days ago, something went wrong. Walter received a signal that made his blood run cold. Compromised. Abort. Extract. Someone had breached the operation. Someone inside. No. Walter had to warn his handler using the only method available. A grocery list that would look innocent to anyone except those trained to see the truth. He hadn't expected a young store clerk to be smart enough to recognize it, and he certainly hadn't expected federal agents to show up at his door so quickly. Now, sitting in his living room with Agent Torres staring him down, Walter realized the walls were closing in. If there was a traitor inside the CIA, coming clean to the FBI might get him killed. But staying silent might cost innocent lives. You want to know what operation never ended? Walter said finally, his voice heavy with resignation. Then you better sit down, because this story goes back 30 years, and it doesn't have a clean ending. Agent Torres pulled out a recording device and placed it on the table. Start talking, Mr. Brennan. And so Walter began. He told them about Esther, about Silver Shield, about the phone call 3 months ago, about the messages, the dead drops, and the warning he tried to send. There's someone inside, Walter said quietly. Someone high up, someone who's been selling secrets. And they reactivated Silver Shield as a trap. A trap for who? Torres asked. Walter looked her straight in the eye. For me, and for anyone else who knows the truth about what really happened in Budapest in 1994. Torres exchanged glances with her team. What happened in Budapest, Mr. Brennan? Walter's hands trembled as he spoke the words he had kept buried for decades. Esther Kovacs didn't die in that fire. She was taken, and I think she's still alive. What do you think about Walter's revelation? Does his story make sense to you? Are you starting to understand the weight this man has carried? Leave your thoughts in the comments right now, because what comes next is going to shake the foundation of everything Walter thought he knew about loyalty, love, and the CIA's darkest secrets. The FBI conference room in Washington, D.C. was sterile and cold, the kind of place where careers were made and destroyed with equal efficiency. Walter sat at a long table, surrounded by federal agents, CIA liaisons, and analysts who typed furiously on laptops, cross-referencing every word he said with classified databases that spanned decades. Agent Rebecca Torres led the interrogation, but Walter could see the others watching him carefully, some with suspicion, others with something that looked like respect. He was a relic from another era, a time when spies operated on instinct and courage rather than satellites and algorithms. Let me make sure I understand, Torres said, reviewing her notes. You believe Operation Silver Shield was reactivated not to gather intelligence, but to lure you out of retirement. Not just me, Walter corrected. Anyone connected to what really happened in Budapest. Anyone who might know the truth. And what is the truth, Mr. Brennan? Walter took a deep breath. In 1994, there was a joint CIA Mi-6 operation in Budapest. The goal was to extract high-value defectors from what remained of Soviet intelligence networks. Esther was one of the coordinators. She had connections, access, and more courage than anyone I've ever known. He paused, his throat tight with emotion. The operation was betrayed. Someone leaked the details to Russian intelligence. Instead of extracting our assets, we walked into an ambush. 3 agents died. 5 more were captured and never seen again. Esther was taken because they knew she was important to me. It was personal, a message. A message saying what? Torres Prest. That no one betrays Moscow and lives. That love makes you weak. That I should have known better. The room fell silent. Finally, a CIA liaison named Martin Gallagher spoke up. He was in his early 50s, with silver hair and the kind of weathered face that spoke of too many years in the field. I reviewed the Budapest incident. The official record says Esther Kovacs died in a warehouse fire. No evidence of Russian involvement. No evidence of anything except an accidental death. The official record is a lie, Walter said flatly. I was there. I saw the aftermath. That body they identified wasn't Esther. The DNA match was falsified. That's a serious accusation, Mr. Brennan. I spent 6 months investigating. I followed every lead. I talked to contacts in Hungary, Austria, Germany. Everyone said the same thing. Esther was taken alive to Moscow. She was interrogated, probably tortured for information, and then she disappeared into the Gulag system. Torres leaned forward. If that's true, why wasn't it reported? Walter's laugh was bitter. Because the Cold War was over. Because the CIA wanted to close that chapter and move on. Because acknowledging that we lost agents would have been politically embarrassing. So they buried her, and told me to shut up and move on. But you didn't? How could I? The interrogation continued for hours. Walter provided names, dates, locations. The analysts worked frantically to verify his information. Some of it checked out. Other details were classified so deeply that even the CIA liaisons couldn't access them without special authorization. Finally, Torres called for a break. Walter was escorted to a Holden room where he was given coffee and a sandwich he didn't touch. His mind was racing. By telling them everything, he had crossed a line. If there really was a traitor inside the agency, they now knew he was talking. 2 hours later, Torres returned with Gallagher and another man Walter didn't recognize. He was younger, maybe 40, with sharp eyes and an air of authority that suggested he was someone important. Mr. Brennan, this is Deputy Director Richard Holloway from the CIA's Counterintelligence Center. Holloway sat across from Walter and studied him carefully. I've read your file. Impressive career, a lot of commendations. Also a lot of question marks about your stability after Baghdad. I was grieving, Walter said simply. That doesn't make me unstable. Fair enough. I'm going to be blunt with you, Mr. Brennan. We've been investigating unusual intelligence activity for 6 months. Coded messages, encrypted communications, and what appears to be a dormant network that's been reactivated. We thought it was foreign intelligence. But your testimony suggests it might be something else. An inside job, Walter said. Exactly. And if that's true, we have a serious problem. Holloway opened a file and spread several photographs across the table. They showed various people in different locations, cafes, parks, street corners. Recognize any of these individuals? Walter studied them carefully. Most were strangers. But then he froze. One photograph showed a man in his 60s standing near a fountain in Prague. The image was grainy, taken from a distance, but Walter would recognize that face anywhere. "That's impossible," he whispered. "Who is he?" "Tohis?" "Ask Tohis." Ask. Walter's hands shook as he picked up the photograph. "That's Thomas Reed, my partner, the man who died in Baghdad in 2003. The room exploded with questions. How could he be sure? Could it be someone who looked similar? What were the chances? But Walter was certain. "I carried his coffin. I stood at his memorial. But that's him. I'd stake my life on it." Holloway and Torres exchanged meaningful glances. "Mr. Brennan, if Thomas Reed is alive, that changes everything. It means his death was faked. It means he's been operating off the books for 20 years. And it means he's the traitor," Walter finished, his voice hollow. The revelation hit him like a physical blow. Thomas had been his closest friend. They had trusted each other with their lives. The idea that Thomas had betrayed him, betrayed the agency, betrayed everything they stood for, it was almost too much to bear. "But why?" Walter asked, more to himself than to them. Why would he do it? Holloway pulled out another file. "We've been tracking financial transactions linked to offshore accounts, large sums of money moving through shell corporations. The pattern suggests someone has been selling classified information for years, not to one buyer, but to the highest bidder. A private intelligence broker operating outside any government control. And you think that's Thomas? We think he faked his death to go independent, create his own network, sell secrets without oversight or consequences. And we think he reactivated Operation Silver Shield to flush out anyone who might expose him." "Including me," Walter said. "Including you, because you know things, Mr. Brennan. You were there in Budapest. You know about Esther. And if Thomas has her Walter's head snapped up, you think he has Esther?" Torres nodded slowly. "If she's alive, and if Thomas has been operating as a broker, he might have access to Russian intelligence assets. He might have found her, and he might be using her as leverage." "Leverage for what?" "To keep you quiet, to control you, to make sure you never expose what happened in Budapest." Walter felt the walls closing in. Everything he thought he knew, everything he had believed for 20 years, was a lie. Thomas wasn't dead. Esther might be alive. And the operation he thought he was part of was actually a trap designed to protect a traitor. "What do you need from me?" Walter asked quietly. Holloway leaned forward. "We need you to go back in. Make contact with whoever's running you. Play along. Help us identify Thomas's network and shut it down. That's a suicide mission. Probably, but you're the only one who can do it. Thomas trusts you, or at least he thinks he can control you. Use that." Walter looked at the photograph of Thomas again. His friend, his brother in arms, the man who had saved his life and who he had mourned for 20 years. "And if I find Esther, then you bring her home," Torres said softly. Walter closed his eyes and made his decision. "All right, I'm in. But I do this my way. Old school. No surveillance teams breathing down my neck. No digital tracking. Just me and whatever ghosts are waiting out there." Holloway extended his hand. "Deal?" They shook on it, and Walter knew he had just signed his own death warrant. But if there was even a chance that Esther was alive, if there was even a possibility of bringing her home after 30 years, then it was worth it. Thank you for staying with this story. We know it's intense, we know it's complicated, but trust us, the best is still to come. Walter is about to walk back into a world he thought he'd left behind. He's about to face the man who betrayed him, and he's about to discover that some secrets are worth dying for. Keep watching, keep listening, because the next chapter is where everything explodes. The plan was simple in theory, deadly in execution. Walter would resume his role as a relay in the reactivated Operation Silver Shield. He would follow the protocols, make the dead drops, and wait for contact. The FBI and CIA would monitor from a distance, ready to move when the traitor revealed himself. But Walter knew it wouldn't be that clean. Thomas Reed. If he was really alive and orchestrating this, was too smart to walk into a trap. He would be watching, testing, waiting for Walter to make a mistake. The first contact came 3 days later. Walter found a message hidden in the classified ads section of the Washington Post. Just as before, the code was simple. Grandfather clock needs repair. Contact antique dealer on M Street. Walter recognized it immediately. There was an antique shop on M Street in Georgetown that had been used as a meeting point during the Cold War. It was neutral ground, public enough to avoid suspicion, but private enough for sensitive conversations. He arrived at the shop on a gray October morning. The air smelled of rain and old wood. Inside, the shop was cluttered with furniture from different eras. Victorian chairs, Art Deco lamps, mid-century modern tables. An elderly man behind the counter looked up as Walter entered. "Help you find something?" the man asked. "I'm looking for a grandfather clock," Walter replied, using the predetermined phrase. The man's eyes flickered with recognition. "Third floor, take the back stairs." Walter climbed the narrow staircase, his heart pounding. He didn't know what he would find. At the top, a door stood slightly ajar. He pushed it open and entered a small room filled with clocks of all kinds, their ticking creating a symphony of time passing. A figure stood with his back to the door, looking out the window at the street below. "Hello, Walter." The voice was older, rougher, but unmistakable. Walter felt his blood turn to ice. Thomas Reed turned around slowly. He looked different. Older, thinner, with gray hair and a beard that hadn't been there before. But the eyes were the same. Sharp, calculating. "Alive? You're supposed to be dead," Walter said, his voice barely above a whisper. Thomas smiled sadly. "I was. For a while. It's amazing what you can accomplish when the world thinks you're gone. Why fake my death? Why disappear? Why build something outside the system?" Thomas walked closer, his hands in his pockets. "Because I got tired of being a pawn, Walter. Tired of risking everything for people who saw us as expendable. You felt it too. I know you did. After Esther, after Budapest, you wanted out, so you became a traitor." Thomas's expression hardened. "I became free. I built a network that answers to no government, no ideology, just results. Information for the highest bidder. It's cleaner that way. Honest, even. You sold secrets. You got people, kid. People were going to die anyway. I just made sure their deaths meant something, generated value." Walter felt disgust rising in his throat. "You betrayed everything we stood for." "We stood for nothing." Thomas's voice rose, anger breaking through his calm facade. "We were tools, Walter, used and discarded. You know it. You lived it. They let Esther die. They told you to move on, to forget her, as if 20 years of service meant nothing. Esther didn't die in Budapest. Thomas paused. A flicker of surprise crossed his face. You know, I know you took her, or someone in your network did. Where is she, Thomas? Thomas studied Walter for a long moment, then sighed. You always be too smart for your own good. Yes, Esther is alive. She's been alive this whole time. The Russians held her for years, but when the Soviet Union collapsed, she became ... available. I acquired her. Acquired. Walter's hands clenched into fists. She's a person, not property. She's a bargaining chip. Insurance. I knew that one day you might figure things out. I needed leverage to keep you quiet. Where is she? Safe. For now. But that depends on you, Walter. I reactivated Silver Shield to bring you back in, to see if you were still loyal, to see if you could still follow orders without asking questions. And if I couldn't, Thomas's smile was cold. Then Esther dies. For real this time. Walter felt the world tilt. Everything he had feared was true. Thomas had orchestrated all of this. The codes, the messages, the operation, it was all a test, a trap. What do you want from me? Your silence? Your cooperation? There are people in the CIA and FBI who are getting close to my network. I need you to feed them false information. Lead them astray. Buy me time to shut down certain operations and relocate assets. And if I refuse, Thomas pulled out a phone and showed Walter a photograph. It was recent, taken within the last few days. Esther, older now, her hair gray, but alive. She was sitting in what looked like a small apartment, reading a book. She looked tired, but unharmed. She's in a secure location, well treated, comfortable even. But if you don't cooperate, that changes. I have people who will make her disappear permanently. No body, no trace, just gone. Walter stared at the photograph, his heart breaking. After 30 years, she was alive, within reach, but held hostage by a man he had once called brother. How do I know you'll keep your word? How do I know you won't kill her anyway? You don't, Thomas admitted. But what choice do you have? Work with me, and she lives? Maybe one day, when this is all over, I'll even let you see her. Face to face. Say your goodbyes properly, or I could kill you right now. Thomas didn't flinch. You could try, but I'm not alone. There are 3 operatives in this building, all armed, all watching us right now. You wouldn't make it out alive. And Esther would be dead within the hour. Walter knew it was true. Thomas had always been meticulous. He wouldn't have exposed himself without insurance. What's the first assignment? Thomas relaxed slightly. There's an FBI agent named Rebecca Torres. She's leading the investigation into my network. You need to convince her that the trail leads to a Russian oligarch named Dmitry Volkov. He's real, he's dirty, and he's got enough connections to make the story believable. Point them at him, and they'll waste months chasing a dead end. And then we'll see. One step at a time, Walter, just like the old days. Walter nodded slowly, his mind racing. He would play along. Feed Torres the false information, but he would also find a way to locate Esther. And when he did, he would burn Thomas's entire network to the ground. All right, Walter said. I'll do it. For her. Thomas extended his hand. I knew you would. You always were a romantic. Walter shook it, feeling the weight of betrayal and determination in equal measure. As he left the antique shop, his phone buzzed. A text from Torres. "Did you make contact?" Walter typed back. "Yes. Need to meet. I have a name." But what Walter didn't tell Torres was that he had also planted a tracking device in Thomas's coat pocket during their handshake. Old school, analog, undetectable by electronic sweeps. The game had just begun. This story is almost at its end, but the most explosive revelations are still ahead. If you've made it this far, you're invested. You care about Walter. You care about Esther. You want to see justice done. So stay with us. Don't click away now. Subscribe to this channel. Hit that like button, because if you're watching this far, it means you're hooked, and you deserve to see how this all ends. The next chapter brings everything together. The confrontation, the rescue, and a truth that will leave you speechless. Stay tuned. The tracking device Walter had planted on Thomas led the FBI and CIA to an abandoned warehouse complex on the outskirts of Baltimore. It was the kind of place where forgotten industries went to die, rusted metal, broken windows, and the perpetual smell of decay and neglect. But the satellite imagery showed recent activity. Vehicles coming and going, heat signatures indicating occupation. Thomas Reed was using it as a base of operations. Walter sat in the back of an unmarked van with Agent Torres, Deputy Director Holloway, and a tactical team from the FBI's hostage rescue team. They had been surveilling the location for 18 hours, mapping entrances, identifying guards, and planning the assault. "We count 8 hostiles," Torres said, reviewing the thermal imaging. "All armed, military-grade weapons. Thomas is in the central structure, 2nd floor. We also have confirmation of at least one civilian presence in the East Wing." "Esther," Walter said quietly, "most likely. We go in at 04:00 hours. Fast and clean. Neutralize the hostiles, secure Thomas Reed, and extract the civilian." Walter shook his head. "It won't be that simple. Thomas knows we're coming." "How?" "Because he's spent 20 years staying ahead of people like you. He's paranoid, meticulous, and always 3 steps ahead." "That tracking device I planted?" "He found it. He's letting us come because he wants this confrontation." Holloway frowned. "Then this is a trap." "Of course it's a trap, but it's also our only chance to end this he-has stir. He has intelligence that could compromise dozens of active operations. We can't just walk away." "So what do you propose?" Walter looked at the warehouse through the van's window. "I go in alone. Talk to him. Buy you time to position your team. When I give the signal, you move." "That's suicide," Torres said bluntly. "Maybe, but it's also the only play we have. Thomas won't shoot me. Not immediately. He'll want to gloat. Explain why he's smarter than everyone. That's his weakness. His ego." Holloway and Torres exchanged glances. Finally, Holloway nodded. "You get 15 minutes. After that, we're coming in, signal or no signal." Walter stepped out of the van at 03 for 5 hours. The October night was cold, and fog rolled across the industrial wasteland like something out of a ghost story. He walked slowly toward the main entrance, his hands visible, no weapon. Just an old man walking into the lion's den. The door opened before he reached it. A young operative, maybe 30, with the flat eyes of a career mercenary, gestured him inside. "He's waiting for you. 2nd floor." "You know the way." Walter climbed the metal stairs, each step echoing in the vast empty space. At the top, another door stood open, revealing a makeshift office. Thomas sat behind a desk, looking relaxed, a glass of whiskey in his hand. "I knew you'd come," Thomas said, gesturing to a chair. "Couldn't resist, could you? The hero's instinct saved the girl. Stop the villain." "Where's he still?" "Close. Don't worry, she's safe for now," Walter said, his eyes never leaving Thomas. "You knew about the tracking device?" "Of course. You taught me that trick in Moscow. Remember? Analog surveillance to avoid electronic detection. I removed it an hour after you left the antique shop and placed it exactly where I wanted you to find me. So this is the end game." Thomas leaned back. "Not quite. This is the negotiation. You see, Walter, I don't want to kill you. You were my best friend. My brother, I genuinely care about what happens to you. You have a hell of a way of showing it. I'm giving you a choice. Walk away. Convince Torres and her team that I escaped. Let me disappear with my network intact. In return, I'll release Esther. You two can have whatever life you want. Retire somewhere quiet. Grow old together. Isn't that what you always wanted?" Walter stared at him, searching for any sign of the man he once knew. "And the people you've betrayed, the operations you've compromised, the agents who died because you sold them out. Collateral damage. Unfortunate but necessary. You've become a monster, Thomas." Thomas's expression hardened. "I've become realistic. The world doesn't run on honor and patriotism, Walter. It runs on power and money. I simply chose to be on the winning side by selling your soul, by surviving something you were never good at. You held on to your principles, and look where it got you. Alone, broken, haunted by ghosts." Walter felt anger surge through him, but he kept his voice level. "I'd rather be haunted than hollow." Thomas stood, his patience wearing thin. "I'm offering you everything you want. Esther, freedom, a chance to finally be happy. All you have to do is walk away and let me go. And if I refuse—" Thomas pulled out a phone and pressed a button. On the screen, a live video feed showed Esther in a small room. She was tied to a chair, fear evident in her eyes. A masked man stood behind her, holding a gun to her head. Then she dies, and you live with the knowledge that you chose principles over the woman you love. Again, Walter's hands trembled. He thought about all the years of service, all the sacrifices, all the times he had put duty before personal happiness. And here, at the end, he was being asked to make the same choice one more time. "There's a third option," Walter said quietly. "And what's that?" Walter pressed a small button hidden in his watch, the real signal device. "I take you down with me." The windows exploded inward as the FBI's hostage rescue team breached from multiple entry points. Flashbangs detonated. Smoke filled the room. Thomas dove for cover, drawing a weapon. But Walter was faster than his age suggested. Years of training took over. He tackled Thomas, and they crashed to the floor. "You idiot!" Thomas shouted, trying to aim his weapon. "She died." "No," Walter grunted, struggling for control of the gun. "She won't." Because Walter had seen something Thomas hadn't. The video feed was on a loop. The time-stamp kept resetting. It wasn't live. Thomas had been bluffing. The cavalry arrived. Federal agents swarmed the room, securing Thomas and pulling Walter away. Outside, Walter heard gunfire, shouts, and then silence. Agent Torres appeared, helping Walter to his feet. "The building is secure. We got them all." "Esther," Walter gasped. "East Wing?" She's alive! Shaken, but alive. Walter didn't wait for permission. He ran, his old legs protesting, his lungs burning, but he didn't care. He burst through a door into a small room where medical personnel were checking on a woman with gray hair and eyes that, despite everything, still held that same intelligent spark he remembered from 30 years ago. "Esther," he whispered. She looked up, and for a moment neither of them moved. 3 decades of separation, pain, and longing hung in the air between them. Then she smiled, a real, genuine smile that cut through all the darkness. "Hello, Walter." "Took you long enough." He crossed the room and pulled her into his arms, and for the first time in 30 years, Walter Brennan felt whole. Epilogue. 6 months later. Alexandria, Virginia. Walter and Esther walked hand in hand through a park near the Potomac. Bailey, the golden retriever, trotted happily ahead, chasing leaves. The winter had been hard. Debriefings, therapy, legal proceedings. Thomas Reed was in federal custody, awaiting trial on charges of espionage, treason, and a dozen other crimes. His network had been dismantled, though intelligence agencies across the world were still sorting through the damage. But today, none of that mattered. The sun was shining, the air was crisp and clean, and Walter was with a woman he had mourned for 3 decades. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if we'd run away back then?" Esther asked, her accent still carrying that musical quality he loved. "Every day," Walter admitted. "But then I wouldn't have become the person who could save you. Always the romantic. Always." They stopped at a bench overlooking the river. Walter pulled out an envelope from his jacket. "What's this?" "Eskit. Eskit. Official pardon from the Hungarian government. Recognition for your service during the Cold War. Also, citizenship papers for the United States, if you want them." Esther took the papers, her eyes glistening. "And what do you want, Walter Brennan?" He looked at her, this woman who had haunted his dreams and driven his every action for so long. "I want to spend whatever time we have left making up for the years we lost. No more secrets, no more lies, just us." "That sounds perfect." Marcus Chun, the young man whose sharp eyes had started this entire chain of events, jogged past with headphones in his ears. He waved at Walter, who waved back. Marcus had aced his military entrance exam and was headed to basic training. Sometimes, Walter thought, the next generation gets it right. As the sun began to set over the Potomac, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold, Walter squeezed Esther's hand. They had been through hell and back. They had lost years they could never reclaim. But they were here, together. And that was enough. Sometimes, the best endings aren't the ones where everything is perfect. They're the ones where, despite everything, love survives. And that, dear viewers, is the story of Walter Brennan, a man who served his country in the shadows, who lost everything but never stopped fighting, and who proved that even after 30 years, some loves are worth waiting for. His story reminds us that heroism isn't always loud or obvious. Sometimes, it's an old man with a grocery list, trying to do the right thing one last time. We want to hear from you. What did you think of Walter's story? Did it move you? Did it make you think differently about the sacrifices made by intelligence operatives around the world? Comment below and tell us your name and what city and state you're watching from. We love hearing from our community. If you enjoyed this story, make sure you're subscribed to this channel. Hit that notification bell so you never miss our next incredible narrative. And please share this video with someone who appreciates powerful storytelling about real human drama. Up next on your screen, you'll see our recommendation for another amazing story that we think you'll love. Click on it, keep watching, and join us on another journey into the extraordinary lives of ordinary people. Until next time, remember, the most incredible stories are often hiding in plain sight. You just have to know where to look. Thank you for watching.